Hi, welcome back to another episode of Tuba People TV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all of the time. Puddles and I are here in Chicago, South Michigan Avenue, once again in the lovely home of Charles Schuchat. Thank you again, Charlie. I think this is interview number 4 in this apartment. Mm-hmm. And we're very blessed and pleased to have with us longtime trumpet freelance artist, Mr. John Cvejanovich. John, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor. It's an honor.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's our honor to have you here with us. So, been looking forward to having John come in and sit with us for a few years now.
That's
and,
right.
So glad that you were able to make it now. I find, and I hope that this will unwrap during the course of this interview, that John has a really terrific experience with Mr. Jacobs, because you initially encountered him, I think it was 57 to 62.
That's right.
And then you had this period of time where you didn't see him, but then from 92 to 98, you studied with him, because you basically were driving Mr. Jacobs
twice a week
mm-hmm. to and from the Fine Arts Building. So hopefully we can get to all the great stuff that's in between those two experiences. But let's just start with
the beginning.
What drew you to Mr. Jacobs' studio?
Okay. As a student of Ren Schilke at Roosevelt University, and under the radar, so to speak, with Vince Cichowicz, the vocal instructor at Roosevelt, student, was on recital, programming the Bach cantata 51, Jacobs in London, and there's a trumpet part in there, equivalent to the soprano. And the teacher came to Ren Schilke for a trumpet player, a trumpet student, and he says, well, John will do that, he'll play that. And Schilke was so helpful to me because he knew that because of the recital situation of piano and soprano and trumpet, no strings, that a C trumpet or a B flat trumpet was a little heavy. So he actually made a special D trumpet for me to use, what is called a French D or an oratorio D. Really worked beautifully to use on that piece. So as I'm practicing this, and especially with Vince, there were some problems I had with that music that Vince thought that it would be helpful to see Jake. Basically, I had trouble with a 2-measure trill to have that consistently come out. I was always falling off the trill. And to get the tonguing in that piece not too pecky, so that it sounded as fluent as the singer was singing. So one of the things that Jacobs initially suggested about that, and I'll get the specifics in his basement with the lesson per se, was that I try to seek out a recording, and I did, of Elizabeth Schwarzkopf and Arnold Scherbaum. And it was a very helpful thing, to copy that. And I found myself trying to copy more what Elizabeth Schwarzkopf was singing than this guy's trumpet playing. Not that that was bad, he was good, but there was something so musical about that lady that I went that way. So anyway, like we're doing now, I'm talking a mile a minute about this piece and this and that, and Jacobs, very polite, he says, John, maybe, just maybe, if you take that horn out and start playing, I can help you. You know what I mean? So I'm real good at talking trumpet, right? Okay. So I start playing, and he lets me play for a while. And then he stops, and like the good perceptive diagnostician, he says, I see that you've been a shallow breather your whole life. I mean, it's a strong habit with you. These replacement breaths are such where you stop to take a breath, even in an instant, but no air is going in. He said, and why that's causing this whole difficulty right off the bat is that right from the beginning, you're violating Boyles Law. He says, write that down, for me to do my homework to look that up. It has to do with equalization of air pressure of out here and in here and there. He said, and because you're running out of air fast, you don't have a good inhalation, you're almost immediately playing in the lower quadrant of the pulmonary function curve. He says, write that down. And he showed me what that was later with blowing into the tank of water to move that cylinder out as the stylus was drawing the graph down of what that curve looked like, on graph paper. And he said, because you're trying to have usage of what little air you have left, you're elevating your tongue so high that you're interfering with the Beurnolli Principle. Write that down. He says, and at the end, you're going into isometric contraction, triggering the Valsalva reflex. Write that down. And I'm thinking, holy moly. And he said, but you know something? You play with taste. You're a good musician. You may be struggling with the trumpet, all related to breathing, but he said, we can fix that, you know. He says, now with the tonguing. Okay, with the tonguing, you have to replace all of your TK with D and G, so that this rolls better for you, so that you don't get to the point where it's air and tongue. It has to be air and buzz. He said, so here's the thing. Every articulation is made up of a consonant and a vowel. You got to get to the vowel as fast as possible. Now, some people don't get that. I mean, I got it. I know what he was talking about. And you have to blow these air patterns so that it's air and buzz, not air and tongue. And if you would practice away from the horn, diction and vocalization, like simply repeating the word 22, 22, 22, 22, 22, till you pass out, you start to get the idea of this rolling. So when you start tonguing that piece in the Bach 51, instead of being you're playing you go like that. So you have like this, and so on. But I mean, where you start practicing this, so you get a fluidity in the continuity. Mm-hmm. So right off the bat, as I'm practicing, you know, that stuff, and working on a better inhalation, and what I found that he had this insight for me that started to straighten that out successfully for me. As a matter of fact, I brought you a copy of the program and a review I got in the newspaper from 1960.
Wow!
When we played it, yeah,
that'd be great.
So there was a positive outcome all the way around, right?
Yeah, that's like great.
But so this time that goes by was maybe free of formal lessons at Jacobs' house. This was at his house in the basement.
Yeah.
But I would ride with him to Ravinia when I played extra with the symphony, because we were both Southsiders. And after a rehearsal, we'd go up to Highland Park to the restaurant for dinner with Bud and Lambert and me, and there was another guy in there, I don't remember who it was. I think it was a string player, Frank Fiataroni. And the conversations in the car with Jacobs to and from all were, in fact, containing lesson material per se. So there wasn't necessarily a playing lesson, but there was, you know, a lot of information exchange with him.
Sure.
So a lot of time went by, okay, where this opportunity came to drive Jake back and forth, you know, to the studio, because he was not able to see well enough to drive himself. And he felt Gizzy was not let's say, good a driver, that he worried about her, you know what I mean, going back alone. And
right.
Now, the only time I didn't drive him, this shows you again the measure of the man, what a man she was on the Saturdays where we had parades downtown. Because he didn't want me to get involved in all that traffic at the beginning. At the end was different, I would drive him home, but I mean, not going down. But his neighbor was a police officer. So we'd have the police officer take him in the squad car down there, no problem, right? The lights going, right? Take him right to the Fine Arts Building, you know what I mean, in the squad car. Boom. It's really great. So
a police escort.
Yeah. So now what were these lessons like here? One of the things Jacobs would say to me at the Fine Arts Building, you know, in the lessons that we had at the end of his day, that he thought, since I was so involved with my day job, that is a high school teacher. I initially started as a band director, instrumental music, and then after about 20 years, I made the migration to the computer lab. And I said bye-bye to the band room and hello to basically teaching programming languages like COBOL and Fortran and BASIC and Pascal, blah, blah, blah. And then the microcomputers invaded. And then we had to teach word processing and spreadsheets and database and so on. And what he said to me was that he says, you know, it's amazing that you've been able to keep your playing up considering you have a day job. You don't realize that to really play this instrument well, boy, you have to put the time on task. It's astounding. And so I was just sort of like, getting by. And to point out on the other end about what this involves, in 1974 I made a tour with the symphony to Europe for a month. And on that last trip home, I'm sitting with Vince Cichowicz. He was retiring that month after that tour. And he was talking about his 25 years in the symphony, that any time something came up that he had to call Bud, whether it was related to the orchestra or social or what, didn't matter. Avis, his wife, would say, "Wait, Vince, I'll get him. He's in the basement practicing." He says, "Amazing." No matter what time of the day it was or what day, he says, if once, just once, Avis would have said, "Listen, he went to the hardware store, and when he comes back, I'll have him call you back." No, he's in the basement practicing.
So the driving Mr. Jacobs from 92 to 98, so you would drive him up. You would sometimes you'd have a lesson at the end of the day,
yes.
But sometimes you'd also sit in other people's lessons. What were those things like for you?
In sitting in on the lesson, Jacobs thought that it was a good idea for the player to have somebody there that they would play for. That was of value. Mm-hmm. And what I would notice is that so much of his encouragement, or so much of his input for the player, came from the standpoint of the psychology of playing. Okay, he would say that when this horn player from Iowa was playing, and he said, when you play, you play like you're asking questions. You have to play like you're issuing statements. He said, now that doesn't mean that you have to be abrasive or obnoxious or strident in your playing, but you have to have this to convey. And when you're playing, you need to have your output on telling a story, on playing for an audience. That's why we got this guy sitting here and we play for him. Not to be concerned with being introspective about how you're feeling or what you're taking in your senses. This is because how we explained it to this horn player is that while you're being absorbed and totally inundated with your sensory input, it's interfering with your output. It's like trying to drive a car down the wrong way on a one-way street, all this coming at you. You got to detach yourself from that. And you have to have a phenomenal mental image, so strong in your musical imagination, like as if it were a bright light bulb, shining brilliant about how you want to sound. And you always want to keep that ideal in your head as you're playing. You hear yourself, of course, there's always that, but you always are saying to yourself that the instrument in the head is the important one. The one in your hand is just simply a mirror of the one in your head. And with this approach from the psychology, of playing, where I can share with one of my experiences playing during that time, of the driving time, where I'm playing one of my tunes to warm up, and he stops me and he says, "Hey, John, is that your best sound?" I said, "I don't know. Well, I'm just warming up." He said, No. Talking about the psychology of playing, he says, the first note, on the horn out of the case has to be a performance note, like Maurice Andre, like Bud Herseth. Now, people who are studying with Jake that know what Bud Herseth sounds like and what Maurice Andre sounds like have value here, because you have in your imagination something, to start with. So you have to have that image in your head, he said, of sounding like a world-class player. Now, to show you his power of from the psychology of music, from the psychology, he's not talking about breathing and blowing and lipping or nothing like that. He's only talking about this idea of communication in the art form, he said, of communicating. He says to me, he says, "You see that shadow? There's a shadow of a guy in the frosted glass of his window of his studio." He says, "See that guy there? He's got $50. He wants to hear a $50 note. Play him one. Play him one of those tunes that you like to play." So I pick up my horn and I go, And he says, yeah, but do that again. But he says, that's like maybe $25. He says, you're like $50. So he keeps nudging me. And we do this about 10 times. And each time, it's getting a little better. And while we're playing, I'm laughing because I can't believe that he's not telling me anything about breathing or blowing or corners in and tongue down and nothing about articulation. Just talk to this guy in the hallway. And I'm thinking, how is he doing this so successful with all these students the same way? Now, to show you what a gentleman he was, do you know that there were people, not many, some that would come there intentionally playing really weird and screwed up, just to see if he could untangle them. I thought that was.
You mean they weren't tangled up and really, but they would pretend to be
playing weird?
No kidding.
I mean, I was dumbfounded, and like me, I would have thrown them out. You know what I mean? But I can't say enough what a gentleman and what a outstanding, person that he was.
Right.
Absolutely great character. Great.
So
character.
he would take the pretender and
still try to help them with that nonsense.
Right.
Amazing. Just amazing.
Huh. When you were you had this opportunity to see the progression of his teaching style from the 50s, then jump into the 90s.
Bravo.
What do you notice about that?
All of that scientific component of the lesson was gone. No more than in 7 years, twice a week, and all those students that I heard, playing. It wasn't just trumpet players there, like I said, it was horn players, trombone, tuba. I think there was even a harmonica player. Yeah, a guy here in town who played the blues called Corky Siegel was studying with him, a harmonica player. But okay. And here's the interesting thing that segued from, are you ready? Boyles Law, lower quadrant of pulmonary function curve, right? Beurnolli Principle, okay? Isometric contraction, Valsalva reflex, none of that. It all became song and wind, with the emphasis on the song. Now, there were times when he would try to get these players to use thick air, okay? And it was for some people hard to grasp. What does this guy mean, thick air? And he had a great ability to use good analogies to try to get people to get onto the idea of moving the air freely by blowing from in front of your lips, rather than a lot of embouchure resistance and pushing against your lips with the air, but blowing from here. And when you think of thick air, he would say to a player that wasn't grasping that, he says, violin players play with a violin bow, don't they? He said, but just imagine the sound they could draw from those strings if they used a viola bow. Now, this is based on the fact that these people would understand that the hair on a violin bow is like this and the viola bow is like that, He said, just imagine if they played with a bass bow, the sound that they could draw out of that. I mean, he was trying to do something to get them. Now, I never had any kind of confusion with him. What he would tell me to do, I understood what he was talking about in that. But that comes because I was in the, no pun intended, driver's seat with him a long time, right? These people that come and take one lesson with him, they would finish, they would go. He says, that's going to last about 3 days. And back they go. You know what I mean, to the old way of playing. He says, you know why? He says, because habits, John, begin like cobwebs and they end in iron chains. You can't get rid of them. He says, it's futile. Don't think that the way you played, before is gone just because you replaced it with this, this other approach. Because under times of stress and tension, where you're in some situation, that all comes back. He says it just does. Like, for example, in terms of what I was saying to you, Michael, about using examples when you would ask somebody, well, what did he do in this lesson? Okay, like say for a player that he wants to have them understand that they need to have some proportion to their notes. And he would arbitrarily give them a number. Like if you play a low C, he says, just say that's a 5, right? Now you're going to play a C in the staff. That's a 10, because it's an octave, right? It's not a 20, it's not a 30. And he says, you trumpet players are great. He says, for using much too much embouchure resistance on these notes at the top of the staff. You got to learn to bring them down into the mid-range. And he says the way you do that is you use the low notes to teach the high notes. He said, for example, he says, you play these G's, and then you play G's in the step. So you play. Now, as you're playing these notes, you're playing them repeatedly. Listen to each one and pick out which one is the best. Listen to them, and the one that you hear, you know, say of the 5, try to keep that in your musical imagination, so in your memory, and repeat that.
Hear the one out of those 5 that's the best.
Yes, that has the kind of resonance. He said, go, play these notes for me. So I'm playing. Incidentally, it's hard to talk and play the trumpet at the same time, too. It's no joke. So, okay, because this is funny. Because here I'm pontificating here, like I'm on my soapbox, and then when I go to demonstrate, it sounds shitty. They say, what is this guy talking about? So let's try this again, about these 5 notes and finding the, and I'll play another one that he gave me to do. In both instances, to my ear, I thought the third one, you know, by a tinge, was about the best one. So then he showed me what to practice to really solidify this. He says, you play these chords like this. You play that last note with a diminuendo, take the mouthpiece off a little bit, and reattack that note piano to develop that piano accuracy. Mm-hmm. Now, when you carry this up and you really practice hard, you know, level by level by level, you're able to do that in the upper range. And in the process, you're bringing those notes that you're squeezing, like you're pushing a piano up the stairs, down into the mid-range. But it takes diligence. I mean, you got to do that. And he says, for example, John, how many low C's have you played in your life? For goodness sake, how many? Thousands, right? How many high C's? As many? He said, no. He said, well, there it is, right? If you played as many high C's as you did low C's, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it's very powerful.
So it's the repetition. It's the
exactly
how habits are built through repetition. The train tracks, the path.
Exactly, because he says he said to me, those neural patterns, he says, have to be over time developed. You know, those messages the same way when you look at a lawn where people have, instead of walking on the sidewalk, they walk on the lawn, and they walk on this path. He says, you see how that grass is beat down because people walk. So those neural patterns are the ones that are developed, he says, at a very sophisticated level. He said, and as long as you're triggering that with your imagination and your musical content in your brain, you will have success.
Yeah, I remember him talking about the whole habit forming and neural pathway development with this path in the grass
analogy,
yeah. And just how those the habits, they start as cobwebs and they end up as chains. How they, you know, the habit is the neural pathway representing that habit never goes away. It just falls into disuse.
Disuse, right?
But you can you don't want to, you can't break an existing habit, but you can replace it with a better one.
Yes.
But the moment you go back to the conditions that enabled that initial habit in the first place, it'll spring alive.
Exactly.
So it does take a lot of diligence, as you mentioned, to
it does
develop better habits and to keep those better habits going, so that the old, less good habits.
And he said you'd be surprised by using materials to nurture this scale-wise, because you're making these small increments. You're not overdoing this embouchure resistance, you know, say from a low note to an upper note.
So let me just say, you're blowing from the lips. I remember him talking about
from
blowing
the front of your lips.
Yeah,
right.
Blowing from the lips rather than blowing to the tongue.
Yes.
And that's where, in my experience as a teacher, that's where so much of the physical effort, unneeded, unnecessary states of increased tension, it really comes from that whole blowing the air to the tongue rather than blowing the air to or from the lips.
Right, because if we can get that air moving with speed and energy from in front of our lips, it will stimulate that oboe-like reed opening in our lip to buzz that note.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him talking about the oboe reed.
He said, see, every embouchure that people have basically has length, thickness, and tension.
Yeah.
So he always used to use these analogies of like the numbering system. Like say a low note is 5, and then like he liked for me to play that exercise that was printed in the Hal Leonard book. We used to play that every time, right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Like it goes like this. And he wouldn't be satisfied with me playing it just mechanically, note-wise. He says, tell a story with that phrase.
Right.
Play that for that guy in the hallway. So then I would play. Different kinds of variations of that,
right.
So that we're always communicating, we're always telling a story. And I said, Jake, I think that's where Vince maybe got that idea with those flow studies from something like this, where Vince would play, or have us play, instead of the Arvin, he would have us play. Etc., etc. And I used to make up words to that for Vince that he didn't like that. I said to him, it reminds me of a tune I once heard. He said, what is it? Vince was very serious. He didn't have much threshold for kidding around. I said, I wish I could play high C. I wish I could get out of the staff. He says, very funny. You know what I mean with that? But what I'm getting at is Jake felt that the best way for helping folks struggling that came to him, and we're talking about players who are on jobs. I mean, these are not just school kids and students. These are folks that find that their playing is crumbling and disintegrating and unraveling, and they're in orchestras that come there, for help, is through singing and buzzing and playing. And that's where that worked, Michael, where they starting to sound better leaving than when they came in.
Mm-hmm. Sing, buzz, play.
Right. And he said to me once, like in the early time of driving him, when we were playing, he said, well, how do you play? Because he is astounded that so many of us have no solfeggio in our musical education. I said, well, I put the valves down and I kind of aim for where I think the note is. He said, well, does that work? I said, well, especially when you're playing at the top of the staff and above, most of the time, no. He says, well, stop doing that. In other words, go to singing and buzzing and playing, and you're going to get some good results. So then he would take musical materials like in the Conconi book, where you're playing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, re, mi. So he would have then a little passage like that to buzz after singing.
So he would have you sing and then buzz
and then play,
and then so he'd have you put it back into the
to the trumpet, right? So you have. So let's say to his ear, and even to the ear of the player, it still is tinging on a little bit too tight, a little too forced. He said, play that down a tone, okay? So that you get these freedom aspects going, and let the low notes teach the high notes. So then you play. And then you want more reinforcement. You said, play it even lower. Okay? And then he says, play it up an octave from there.
So, and the point being that let the lower octave teach the upper octave.
Yes.
And so you would try to use you're trying to use that similar airstream.
And singing.
And the singing, right.
But the thing is, you have to do it with so many repetitions that this is where the new habit becomes
stronger. And then at that point, it can really seriously vie for dominance over the existing habit.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I remember him talking about there's this there's a really good relationship between within an octave. So you can have notes, lower notes can really influence greatly. They have an opportunity to influence notes an octave above or less.
Yes.
And so in terms of quality of sound and air, just air, the amount of air that you use.
You know, I saw on YouTube a nice little talk that Jens Lindemann, he teaches at UCLA, gave about what he called the money notes. Mm-hmm. And this is in a way the of all the gamut of notes that we play on the trumpet, say from low F sharp to high C or thereabouts. Lindemann was talking about the notes like from low C, or let's say G in the step, the second line, to fourth space E. In other words, that's sixth, that he called money notes, that those should really be our best notes. And from there, we, like you said, Michael, transfer that quality, above and below.
So you saw him change his pedagogical approach in the 90s from the 50s. Why do you suppose he changed?
I think for folks to grasp the concepts right out of the gate. Song and wind is easy for everybody to latch onto, especially with the emphasis on song. And the whole idea of while you're playing to be singing in your head. Now that is facilitated greatly if we have some semblance of pitch recall, and even better if we have solfeggio. Mm-hmm. So he always would have me do solfeggio in the lesson. Mm-hmm. Always, like in the Getchell book, mm-hmm. for example, we would do solfeggio there, and that is to have that like when we play with a music -1 record, that we play along, that is really dominant in our head, that singing in our head as reflected then in our playing.
Right. That
duality is going.
So the trumpet in the mind is supposed to influence the trumpet in the hands.
Absolutely. Right.
Go ahead.
No, but when I think of the times that I had studied with Carmine Caruso, how different that was. Now, can you imagine all these great New York players who talk about Carmine in the most, thankful, reverent terms of saving their career. Yeah. So he had something too. But there was this little kid taking a lesson, and I'm sitting there watching, and this kid is struggling, and with those six, forcing and squeezing and pushing, he's turning red and everything, and the kid leaves, and Carmine says, "Well, John, what do you think?" I said, "Well, why didn't you jump in and help him? Float the air." He says, "I see you're a Western man, right? In other words, this Zen, Buddhism, Eastern philosophy, yoga business," he says, "the body will find the way." I'm thinking to myself, this kid will be 85 years old before he gets that air moving. Come on, right? So he says to me before we start, I had a hard day. Just a minute. He opens the drawer and he pulls out a bottle of J&B Scotch, takes the lid off, and takes the slug, puts it back in, says, "Let's go," right? And what that was truly an approach of absolute, phenomenal muscle development of your embouchure with those exercises that he would give the players, yeah. Where Jacobs is talking about our lip muscles in hypertrophy. That is the strengthening and the developing and the, and so for a lot of those lead players in New York, screaming high notes and so on, boy, they had chops from that stuff. But there's a danger with that too. I think those players were healthy players to begin with, and this just sort of gave them a challenge of material to work on. The same with Maggio and pedal tones, too, to help re-energize and restore embouchures that were kind of quasi damaged from too much rough playing. Like if you ever played a circus, that's a nightmare.
Right.
I mean, really,
Right.
Good grief.
Right.
You really need to take, rest and recover from that.
Yeah, chops of steel.
Oh, so there's a lot to this, really. But however, I think Jacobs was right by always pointing out examples of people to listen to emulate.
Mm-hmm.
Like today, we're very lucky with YouTube. There are treasures out there of playing examples. One in particular is this young lady from England, Alison Balsam.
Mm-hmm.
That is just tremendous. Especially her piccolo playing.
Yeah.
To copy that.
And Herseth.
Yes.
Yeah, she's another phenomenal trumpeter. Yeah.
Right. Well, Jake used to say about players, in particular like Fletcher, the tuba player in England. He said, there are people that it's a gift from God. They just have it.
Yeah.
That their playing is exemplary.
Yeah, because he was a chemistry guy.
Yeah.
And just a phenomenal musician. So, John, just to double back on your initial
First lesson.
Your initial
Right.
lesson, Chongin, that sort of thing. Anything musical that he?
When I played, he said, from time to time, you play with very good taste, but there are times when you play where it's like you're asking questions that you're like overly careful, or you're like you're walking on eggshells. He says you have to play like you're issuing statements. You cannot play with this attitude, John. He says you cannot play by saying, "Is this it?" You have to play with this attitude. This is it. When you're playing in a situation where you're not sure of, say, an entrance. Typically in orchestral music, what I did not appreciate as a trumpet player is sitting there counting 68 bars rest, and I see this thing coming up, and I'm wondering, am I going to even able to get the first note out? And there's two reasons. There's no solfeggio to rely on, okay? And number two, I'm not approaching it with issuing a statement. That doesn't mean that you have to break the wall down with the entrance. No, but the most important thing that's so uncomfortable, and that contributes to this, a lack of, let's say, positive entrance playing, is you're counting and you're saying to yourself, was that 33 or 34? Where the hell am I? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's a real attention
Okay.
derailer right there.
So the thing about this.
But the thing is, the solfeggio or something similar to that is what influences the other, because
Yes.
it makes the mind come alive with
Because
sound.
you hear
Yeah.
in your, let's call it our musical imagination, we hear inwardly what those notes represent. They're not, for me at that time, simply a name, a letter name, and a fingering. See, and that's very slippery with a trumpet or with any brass instrument that has harmonic series. Just because you put the first two vowels down, that doesn't mean that the A is coming out.
Mm-hmm.
See?
Yeah. I'm wondering, you'd mentioned that you spent several years in the band room as a music educator.
Yes.
I'm wondering, did you find a way to incorporate this very individualized pedagogy of Mr. Jacobs to a broad audience?
Well, in beginner's band one day, these clarinet players, there were about 30 of them there, right?
Yeah.
And they're playing, and it sounds worse than a kazoo, okay? And right off the bat,
A single kazoo or a chorus of kazoo?
I would wonder. I said to them, "Hey, turn your clarinet around so that I could see it." And you see these reeds that they have, and they look like they've been chewed on by a mouse, right? You know what I mean? And I would always say my band helper, give these kids some reeds, you know what I mean, that work. Get their reed on there. And make sure that that reed on there is at the right place. You know, not too high, not too low, but just that little arc of black of the mouthpiece there. Okay. And get it nice and wet. I said, now listen, I'm going to give you something that my teacher, Arnold Jacobs, gave me. Okay. And that is this, that when you blow your air, don't blow your air just into the mouthpiece. Conceptualize that you're blowing your air all the way through your clarinet and your air is hitting the floor. Like that, okay? Not only that, but out in the hallway, Gelsomino, that was our principal. I said, Dr. Gelsomino was out there in the hallway, and he heard about you guys, that you're really doing well. And he really wants to hear, you know, a clarinet section, just like as if you guys were opera singers. Like, you know, the fat guy, you know, Luciano Pavarotti. Mm-hmm. So with that air, and you play for Gelsomino, I says, quick, 6 fingers down, let's go. Let's play that low G. It sounded like, and I'm not exaggerating, the Queen Mary just docked. So there it is. I mean, it's just that simple that stuff works.
Yeah, that's great.
It just works. It just does.
Yeah. You know, you have so much time with Mr. Jacobs. In my own experience, speaking of Mr. Herseth, it seemed like he really he was very affected by Herseth. And I wonder what kind of teacher, even performer, he would have been if Herseth hadn't come along.
That's a very good point, because he told me many times that Herseth was his inspiration, if you will, or influence for his teaching, to really ponder, how is this guy doing this? How is he playing not only so consistently, accurately, and beautifully and musically, and making it sound so easy? And he says, remember, John, you trumpet players have great potential for spoiling concerts. You know what I mean? Okay. Jake I mean, you gotta imagine his tone, you know, that he would say that. Yeah. But Bud was very instrumental, or very inspirational for Jake to try to get a grip on this, is that, what is this guy doing? You know, that is so consistently outstanding, you know, in his playing. Something to the effect, he says, he was in the orchestra. He remembered 3 years, he never heard him make a mistake once of any kind. Mm-hmm. You know, it was just that so consistently, you know, good. Even John Weicker, who was our conductor in Civic and the concertmaster of the symphony, used to tell us in Civic that when Bud came that first summer at Ravinia, we could all finally relax. That trumpet part was just, you know, I mean, just so dependable, and that, you know, and basically that Bud always made it sound easy, what he had to play, no matter what it was. Yeah.
I think in my 5 or 6 years in Chicago as a student, I heard Mr. Herseth chip or miss less than 5 notes. I mean, it was
amazing.
Yeah,
you know, when we were in Civic, we were always enjoying the luxury of hearing the orchestra on Friday afternoon. We'd go up in the office and in the gallery and sit there. And I can still look down now. I can see in my imagination the orchestra playing pictures at an exhibition. Just say the Great Gate of Kiev alone. You know, that it's just phenomenal, that sound.
Yeah.
Of all the...
Do you think that they ever talk shop, Mr. Herseth and Mr. Jacobs, in terms of teaching or the motivations for teaching?
Especially in the bus rides.
Yeah.
Yeah. And talking about Jacobs sitting with Bud, you know, in the bus, and like Bud's here and Jacobs is here, and they're talking about this programming your brain.
Yeah, programming the brain.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the tour and the concert where Berlioz' Roman Carnival, Petrushka, and Bartok Concerto was on the thing, and on the seat, Bud just has his arm on the railing over here of the seat. You know, they're talking with Jake, and you know, we're going along, and here's what I see in Bud's hands right here. Here's what I see. You know what that is? That's Petrushka. See?
So he's practicing on the bus.
He's practicing that right in his brain, just
right.
like that. What a lot of Jacobs' input and encouragement Not that he needs a lesson, that's not the point, but this thing about, now Bud's performances in Chicago with Schulte, there were 4 of them. There were 3. A Thursday night, a Friday afternoon, and a Saturday night at the Brandenburg. Now Monday, the orchestra's in New York in Carnegie Hall with that same program. Charlie Geyer was telling me this. And Bud's not playing on the first half of the program, but after the intermission on the Brandenburg, okay? And he's saying to Geyer back there at Carnegie Hall, it's all real tight with the cases, and it's uncomfortable, and he's playing, the piccolo and a little bit, and he's saying to Geyer, Jesus, I don't know, these notes are not coming down. Geyer said to me, my God, I'm just stunned. So while the intermission was going on, Bud goes out on the stage of Carnegie Hall and just sits there. There's nobody in the orchestra yet coming back from intermission. He's just sitting there. And this is what he told Geyer later, that he just sat there reliving all the successful times that he played in Carnegie Hall. And this is what he said about the Brandenburg and Carnegie Hall, that he was just reliving all the successful concerts that he had in Carnegie Hall with the symphony, okay? Especially with Schulte, because I'm not sure if they went to New York with Reiner, and Martineau. They did go to Carnegie Hall with Martineau, so there were concerts there, of course, but now with Schulte. And he said, now orchestra's back in place. Schulte comes out, right? They start. The notes are coming out. How is it the notes weren't coming out, in the back there, backstage, and now they're coming on the stage and they finish and everybody's, standing ovation, roaring, and Schulte says to Bud, can we do the third movement as an encore? What do you think? He said, let's find out.
Let's find out.
So you see how powerful our musical imagination can help us. Yeah, it's astounding.
That's
it's
great.
Just a marvelous, marvelous thing to go by.
Yeah.
But he in particular, you have to understand what amazing thing it was those 50 plus years. See, around 1952, I think he was in an automobile accident where his lip and teeth were smashed. And he successfully came back from that. Could have been career ending for anybody. And then the next thing was what I told you about the sciatic thing, having to play on one cheek till that finished. The next time was his gallbladder taken out the old way, where you have to recoup from that. Now it's very easy. It's almost an outpatient procedure.
Yeah.
And then his kid died. The young man that worked for the CIA. And then he had a detached retina. And then he had a heart bypass. Now through all of that, you know what I mean? He's functioning. And if I may parenthetically add, and to be able to put up with all the backstage BS and backbiting and nonsense that goes on in that orchestra. And I'll give you a classic one in point. There was a riot. Jacobs would have Michael Mulcahy come and translate for German-speaking students that would come to Jake. And Michael would speak German naturally, and it was very helpful. So Jake, just like like an old alumni from the orchestra, well, Mike, how's it going on down there, blah, blah, blah. And they're talking quietly off to the side. And Michael Mulcahy shares with Jake to say, do you know there are young people coming into our orchestra right now that say, someday we can really have a great orchestra when they get rid of that old guy on first trumpet. Can you imagine not knowing anything? Now, in Bud's later years, his playing was getting a little, strong and powerful. Maybe out of just sheer survival, who knows? He even told me that his playing was 80% of what it was before. And he felt that when he switched to the Monette trumpet, that it gave him a few more years to play. No. All he knows, when he went back to the Bach, he really sounded great. But what I'm getting at is that there is a man that just had an enormous amount of good Norwegian determination, work ethic, and a tough guy. Mm-hmm. So, you're not going to see that again ever in a lifetime. That kind of record, because any of those health, speed bumps in the road would have been the end to many, people.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
So
amazing.
It is amazing.
He was an amazing artist, really.
Those concerts and those rehearsals and those recording sessions and touring and everything, all of that cooperation and nurtured. And Bud always felt that it was Reiner's approach that he told me made men out of them. You know, I mean, to demand that kind of high level of playing.
Right.
And the only thing I can use as an analogy to like Reiner would be the years in football in Green Bay when Vince Lombardi was the coach. It's sort of that same kind of mentality that demand for the highest standard possible to be maintained.
Right.
And it was thrilling to be a student, to be listening, you know, to all of that and to,
Indeed.
you know.
Yeah.
One thing I did notice is that, I mean, not so much that I noticed, but that I just believe that when you think of that whole recording canon of Strauss tone poems that Reiner and the Chicago Symphony did, I'd be hard pressed to say. I mean, I'm hard pressed. I don't want to say this. That would not have been possible without that guy sitting on first trumpet. I just believe that to my soul. That those pieces, what they show.
Yeah, especially when you consider that Heldenleben, which was towards the end of a 12-hour recording session
Yes.
day, and the end of the battle scene, where, you know, first trumpet is ascending. You know, you can tell he's playing on his teeth.
Sure.
But the artistry is still there.
It is. That's
It's
right.
amazing.
It is. It's just a thrilling period, you know, that they had. And Bud always used to say, somewhat, I don't know what try to use the word, not sarcastic or strident or anything, but talking about the fact that they were able to do all those great recordings just with one mic up there, you know,
Right.
I mean, up in the ceiling,
Yeah.
not have them all over the place, you know. Yeah.
Well, John, this has been a terrific time.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really, again, thankful for you coming down. And Puddle says you're number one.
Well, that's very nice. The thing that I have to be careful of is that and it's so hard because the lessons with Arnold Jacobs and those helpful experiences are kind of totally tied in with one's own trajectory of time of playing.
Right.
And I always would listen to your interviews, and I'm saying, I don't want it to be my autobiography. I wanted this to be only about
Right.
Jacobs.
Right.
You see, and his value that he helped so many people that were struggling to play better, and he did it with a great successful track record. Yes, he did.
He did, for sure. And we'd like to present you with your very own Tuba People TV water bottle,
Hey, terrific.
suitable for framing or filling.
Mostly filling. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you. Right.
And now back to you.